Welcome to Executive Leaders Radio, your spot in the corner office, the radio show where executives share their secrets to success. Executive Leaders Radio.
You're listening to Executive Leaders Radio, broadcasting from Marian Bank. This is your host, Hank Boyer, with my co-host, Christine Miles, Equip People, Evan Whitmer, Meridian Bank, Dominic Colasante, 2X Marketing, and Mike Masiello, Top Stack. We got a terrific lineup of guests here for you today. Christine, would you please give us a rundown of who we'll be speaking with?
Sure, Hank. We have Marian Baldini, CEO of Kencrest Services, John Weidenhammer, President of Weidenhammer, Matt Pincus, President of Pincus Elevator Company, and Jocelyn Ewart, Founder and Principal of Entrust Financial.
Thanks, Christine. Let me introduce you to Marian Baldini, CEO of Kencrest Services. Welcome, Marian. What is Kencrest?
Kencrest is an education and human service agency. We serve about 12,500 children and adults and employ about 2,500 individuals and contractors.
Wow, so that's a pretty big organization. How long have you been there?
I just finished my 4th year at Kencrest.
Mm-hmm. But your involvement with Kencrest started a number of years earlier. Tell us a little bit about that.
Kencrest was my first job out of grad school. My husband got me a job there as a direct care worker in the late 70s.
So how did you make the jump from being a child care worker there to coming back as CEO?
Well, I proceeded through my career in a variety of places, and one day I got a call from a recruiter saying Kencrest was looking for a CEO, and I told my assistant, I always liked them. So
why did you always like them?
Kencrest has a reputation for seeing what needs to be done and just doing it before other people.
And that was important. That is important in that type of services.
It is.
So bring us back to where you grew up. Where did you grow up?
I grew up in Sharon Hill, and we lived there until I was about 12. We lost our house to fire, and my father built a fixer-upper in Newtown Square, so we moved from that point.
Wait a second. So you're 12 years old and your house burned down. Was anything saved or recoverable?
We really lost everything except my mother's religious figures. I did forget. That just came to mind, but my mother had a chest of religious figures and that survived the fire, but everything else was gone.
How did that must have been devastating to your family. How did that affect you at 12?
Well, the response to our family was amazing. All the churches in the community, except mine, mobilized and brought us blankets and food and really helped us, survive those first few days. So it really changed my mind about faith in a big way.
How so?
Well, I grew up in a town that had two faiths, Catholic and public. And the Catholics were really sure we were the right ones and the publics were wrong. And I found out there were really nice publics as a result of the fire, so it really made me question things that I had been told were true.
And you mentioned in the green room when you shared a little bit about that story that after losing everything, you had a different mindset about relationships. Tell us more.
It's interesting. You play with things and you're attached to things, especially as a child. And my Barbies were a big deal for me. But knowing that the relationships are there got me through that period because, when you don't have things, you look around to what do you have. And it made relationships very clear to me.
So tell us a little bit about Mom and Dad. What did Dad do for a living?
My dad was a carpenter. He always worked for small companies that would build individual houses or renovations, and my mom was a homemaker.
Who are you more like, Mom or Dad?
I'm more like Dad.
Why?
Dad was very clear about the importance of work and doing a really good job. And my mother was more like peace. Everything was about peace with her.
So Dad working hard, doing good work. How does that play out in your role today as CEO at Kencrest?
I think I'm a lifelong learner, so I'm always trying to find another way to do something, and I'm very good at reflecting on my own performance.
So when I'm going back to when you were 12 and you lost your house, where did you go? Who did you stay with?
We actually moved into my grandmother's home right next door, and we stayed there for about 18 months until we could rehab the other house.
What was your relationship like with your grandmother?
Beyond my parents, she was the most important person in my life. She was a little bit of a rebel rouser. She saw what needed to be done and did it in a number of ways. One was race. So she crossed the street in our community. There were black people lived on one side of the street and white on the other, and she crossed over. And she also believed that everyone needed to be included. So she was very passionate advocate for people with disabilities.
So you were kind of a kindred spirit to her, from what I understand. And were you the oldest grandchild? Tell us a little more.
I am the quintessential oldest. I am the oldest of 9 children and the oldest of 36 grandchildren. So I was queen.
Wow. So you were queen. And so your grandmother was a bit of a pioneer in terms of race relations and getting it. You said there was a phrase, on the porch. Tell us more.
So the first day I understood disability was I took a walk with my grandmother and we were approaching the house and she said people with disabilities were not allowed on the porch. People didn't come outside, they didn't go to school, and she said in our family everybody belongs on the porch. And the porch for us was really a metaphor for being together. So that was my first, and I can remember exactly where I was standing when she said it.
Tell us what it was like to be the oldest of 9 children and the oldest of dozens of grandchildren.
There are good aspects and not. The good aspects were, I ruled, so, I had a little social pressure on the others. The bad aspects was you were in charge. So there were times when I really didn't want to be, but I was.
How old were you when you realized that you were in charge of the other children?
I was 4. It was caught on film, and I led a protest. The protest was, I don't want to be photographed anymore, so I organized these small children to line up, put their little behinds to the camera, and unfortunately it failed miserably because they photographed that too. And it's been converted to DVD, just saying.
Oh my, so the evidence is there.
The evidence is still there.
It sounds like your grandmother had a big influence on you, was very inclusive of others. Mm-hmm. Sounds like your parents weren't. How did that affect your relationship with them?
It was an interesting tension between the two, and I just sort of walked right down the middle. My father didn't really quite get my grandmother, so I just went back and forth between, and I tried to ignore the tension from my dad as much as I could.
There were some reasons, though, that your father didn't quite get your grandmother. Where was he from? Tell us his background.
Yeah, my father came to the United States. He's the youngest in his family, and his sisters met and married American servicemen. So he came to the United States as a teenager, not speaking English, not having a trade. So he was always a little awkward.
He was on the outside.
He really was. He felt on the outside. I think people tried to bring him in, but not everybody is equally able to do that.
How do you get your organization to be inclusive and bringing people in when they're dealing with folks that are challenged?
I guess I see everyone as gifted, and I try to point out those gifts. And it's pretty amazing. If you do look for gifts, you see them everywhere. If you don't look, you don't see them.
Did you see that in your dad as a young person?
I did, actually, and my mom too.
And how did that make you feel as a kid that they weren't seeing their own gifts?
I think as a kid I found it frustrating, but I figured eventually maybe it would change because I always think there's possibilities of change.
And your grandmother was the one who saw the possibilities of change.
She not only saw them, she did it. I mean, she just made it happen.
She did something about it.
Right.
When you were a kid, what did you do for fun?
I was a big reader. I also investigated. So I was always looking in things like trash and other people's belongings to see what I could discover, and then I would tell everybody about it.
Wait. You're looking through the trash. Whose idea was that?
I'm sure no one told me to look through the trash, but there was a printing company next to our house, and in the trash one day was a whole collection of pamphlets on menstruation. So I gathered them all up, and I held a class on the back steps. I had no idea what it was, but I told everybody in the neighborhood about it. They couldn't read, so it was okay, I guess.
So what was your first, how young were you, ages 8 to 14, when you first started making money?
I was probably 10. My grandmother had arthritis, and there were still a bunch of adults in the house who had white shirts that needed to be ironed, and she paid me 5 cents a shirt. So that was my first job.
So that was her idea?
It was her idea.
So why'd you stick with it?
I liked the money. I liked to go shopping. Mm-hmm. I learned pretty early that you could get, a really nice peanut butter cup for a nickel. So
that's what you spent your money on?
I spent my money on peanut butter cups, I'm embarrassed to say.
Excellent. So you also talked a little bit about needing to negotiate with your parents for TV time. What was that all about?
Well, I think I ran my parents ragged. I mean, my mom did not finish school. My dad dropped out because of the war, and I would negotiate for whatever I wanted, whatever it was, and TV time was one of those things.
It doesn't seem at all like a coincidence that you're negotiating for those who have have disabilities of learning kind and others and breaking ground like your grandmother. That's not really an accident, is it?
No, it's not an accident.
Have you always known that that's been a big part of your purpose?
I think my purpose got clear and clear as I got older, but I think I knew very early that I was supposed to do something for justice.
Marian, what's the best part of your day?
The best part of my day is when I hear a really good story about someone whose life was changed in some way as a result of something that we did.
Excellent. We've been speaking with Marian Baldini, CEO of KenCrest Systems. What's your website, Marian?
KenCrest.org.
Give it to me one more time.
KenCrest.org.
Again, we've been speaking with Marian Baldini, CEO of KenCrest Services. Don't forget to visit executiveleadersradio.com to learn more about our executive leaders. We'll be right back in a moment after this business spot.